Let me ask you a question you've probably never heard in the midst of your ambition. What if your lack of progress, your burnout, your confusion, it's not because you're unmotivated? What if the problem isn't a lack of fire, but a surplus of noise? See, most people think they need more inspiration, more productivity hacks, more motivational content. But what if that's the trap? What if every time you go searching for more, you're actually drifting further away from the one thing that truly matters, clarity? Because let's be honest, when was the last time you felt still? When was the last time you sat in silence, without reaching for your phone, without rushing to the next goal, without measuring your worth against someone else's highlight reel? If you're like most of us, it's been a while. And that absence of stillness, that addiction to stimulation, that's not just a habit. It's a prison. And the bars are built out of your own distraction. But don't blame yourself. The modern world is a factory of fragmentation. Algorithms built to capture your mind. Notifications engineered to hijack your nervous system. The average person sees more in one day than a Roman emperor saw in a lifetime. And your brain, your ancient, beautifully human brain, wasn't designed for that. It's overwhelmed. It's overstimulated. It's drowning in input. And in that chaos, you've started to believe that you're not doing enough, that you're falling behind, that you need to hustle harder, grind longer, stay motivated. But here's the radical truth. You don't need more motivation. You need less noise. That's not a slogan. That's philosophy. That's psychology. That's neuroscience. And it's also the beginning of your freedom. Let's go back, way back, to the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, faced plagues, betrayals, war, and political chaos. But still, every night he returned to his journal, not to hype himself up, but to simplify, to remember what mattered. Ask yourself at every moment, he wrote, is this necessary? That question is a sword. It cuts through the noise. It exposes what's essential. And if he needed that reminder with all his power and wisdom, what makes you think you don't? You're not lazy. You're not unmotivated. You're overloaded. You're trying to move forward while dragging 1,000 invisible weights. The opinions, the pressures, the projections, the noise. And here's the kicker. The more you try to silence that noise with external motivation, the louder it gets. Because most motivational content doesn't quiet your mind. It agitates it. It tells you you're not enough yet. It pushes you to speed up when your soul is begging you to slow down. It's caffeine for the ego, but starvation for the self. So what's the alternative? Stillness. Stillness is not passive. It's not weakness. It's not inaction. Stillness is clarity. Stillness is strategy. Stillness is what allows the warrior to see the battlefield instead of swinging blindly in the dark. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And most of what we waste it on is noise. Digital, emotional, social, psychological noise. Think about your own day. How often do you reach for your phone not because you need it, but because you're avoiding something inside you? How many times have you stared at the screen to avoid staring at your soul? That's the moment you start to lose your direction. Not because you're lost, but because you're disconnected. Motivation without direction is like fire without form. It burns, but it doesn't build. And that's where most people live, constantly lighting new fires, constantly chasing sparks, constantly feeling burned out. Not because they lack energy, but because they never stop leaking it into the wrong things. The human mind is a magnificent machine, but it needs calibration. Without that, you start absorbing everything you see. You scroll through comparison. You drink in fear-based headlines. You internalize other people's urgency, their trauma, their timelines. And slowly, your compass spins. Your thoughts aren't yours. Your goals aren't yours. Even your emotions, they become echoes of the external world. And the danger is, this all feels normal. That's the scariest part, because the more distracted you become, the less you notice the distraction. You normalize the chaos. You mistake anxiety for drive. You call burnout the grind. You stop asking if the path you're on is even yours. That's the crisis the Stoics were trying to prevent. Not just a crisis of achievement, but a crisis of self. When you lose connection with your inner citadel, the world owns you. Every trend pulls you. Every opinion shakes you. Every delay derails you. But when you reclaim that inner stillness, when you strip away the noise, what's left is real motivation. Not performative, not fleeting, but rooted, aligned, immovable. You want to change your life. Don't start by doing more. Start by subtracting. Subtract the tabs that stay open all day. Subtract the people who speak fear into your dreams. Subtract the false urgency that pushes you to rush what should be unfolded slowly. You don't need to be everywhere. You need to be here, right here, now. Fully present with your values, your breath, your body. Because this moment, this stillness, is where power lives. Not the kind of power that impresses others, the kind that centers you, grounds you, strengthens you. But let's not romanticize it. Stillness is hard, because when the noise goes quiet, your inner world speaks. The doubts, the regrets, the uncomfortable truths. That's why we avoid stillness, because it's honest, because it demands confrontation. But that confrontation is sacred. It's not meant to punish you. It's meant to wake you up. You see, psychology tells us that clarity begins with awareness. And awareness only arises in the absence of distraction. The brain processes over 6,000 thoughts per day. But the most powerful ones, they don't scream, they whisper. And if you're too busy chasing the next thing, you'll never hear them. You'll never hear the voice that says, "This isn't the life I want." You'll never hear the whisper that says, "Slow down, you're not aligned." You'll never notice the ache that says, "This goal looks good, but it doesn't feel right." That's what noise hides. Not just your potential, but your truth. And no amount of motivation can save you from a life built on false goals. This is why the Stoics trained in restraint, in detachment, in clarity. Not to suffer, but to see clearly, to live deliberately, to own their time, their thoughts, their actions. That's not ancient wisdom. That's timeless necessity. So if you feel scattered, stuck, unmotivated, it's not a sign to push harder. It's a signal to listen deeper. And if you can do that, if you can pause, if you can breathe, if you can hear the whisper beneath the noise, then you can rebuild everything, not from hype, but from depth, not from pressure, but from alignment, not from fear, but from truth. That's the start. Now we go deeper. You're still here, and that means something. It means you're ready to do what most people never do. Not search for more noise to escape into, but step deeper into the silence where truth waits. And it's in that space, between the last distraction and your next breath, that something quietly begins to change. Not in the form of more energy or hype, but a new kind of clarity. A slow, patient unfolding of what you've ignored for far too long. Yourself. And this is where we go from understanding to integration. Because it's one thing to know you're overstimulated. It's another thing to shift your entire way of being. You can't just wish for clarity while feeding chaos. You have to cut the cord. You have to get honest about what you've allowed into your life and ask, does this actually serve the person I'm trying to become? That's not a productivity question. It's a philosophy question. It's a spiritual question. It's a psychological reckoning. Because here's what most people don't see. Every time you say yes to noise, you're saying no to yourself. Every time you indulge a distraction that leaves you emptier than it found you, you abandon the one person you can't afford to lose, the version of you that knows, the version of you that doesn't need motivation to act. The version of you that doesn't perform or impress, but moves from principle, from alignment, from something ancient and unmoving. That version isn't loud. That version is rooted. And you don't reach it by doing more. You reach it by subtracting until all that's left is real. Let's talk about what's happening beneath the surface, because it's not just behavioral, it's neurological. The human brain, according to neuroscience, is not optimized for clarity under constant stimulation. In fact, studies show that attention fragmentation not only reduces cognitive function, it reshapes how your brain processes reality. You begin to mistake urgency for importance. Novelty becomes the compass. Dopamine replaces direction. This is what the Stoics warned us about long before we had smartphones. Seneca wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." He wasn't just talking about location. He was talking about consciousness. A fragmented mind cannot hold purpose. It reacts, it follows, it mimics. It forgets who it is and becomes whatever the world hands it next. And then we call it ambition. But ambition without stillness becomes addiction. You chase outcomes without understanding motives. You accumulate achievements while feeling more empty than ever. You burn through to-do lists and wonder why your soul still aches. And so you blame yourself. You think you're not motivated enough, not disciplined enough, not productive enough. But here's the truth you need to hear. It's not a discipline problem. It's a direction problem. And direction can only arise in silence. That silence is not absence, it's presence. The presence to discern what is true from what is noise. The presence to feel your own intuition without needing it to be loud. The presence to stop reacting to every fire around you and finally ask, what am I actually building here? Because most people aren't building anything real. They're performing. And when you perform long enough, you start to confuse the act for identity. You forget how to be until someone is watching. And when no one's watching, you fall apart. That's what the Stoics would call slavery of the mind. Not physical chains, mental ones. Invisible, insidious, self-imposed chains. And the only way out isn't more motivation. It's remembrance, a daily returning, a refusal to outsource your sense of self. Marcus Aurelius didn't remind himself to crush his goals. He reminded himself to die well, to live each day as if it were his last, not in fear, but in presence. And that's the key. Real power isn't intensity, it's consistency. Not burning bright for a moment, but burning true for a lifetime. And you can't burn true if you're distracted by every flicker of noise around you. So now we shift from idea to identity, from understanding to embodiment. The question becomes, how do you protect your clarity in a world addicted to chaos? Not by isolating yourself, not by rejecting the world, but by choosing who gets access to your attention like it's your most sacred resource, because it is. Imagine if you stopped treating your focus like it was infinite. Imagine if you guarded your mind with the same ferocity you use to guard your phone, your wallet, your passwords. Because here's the reality. Your mind is the foundation of every relationship, every dream, every decision. And if that mind is cluttered, confused, or hijacked, you are not free. Not truly. And freedom, according to the Stoics, begins in the mind. Epictetus taught that while we cannot control external events, we can always control our response. But what if your response isn't even yours? What if your emotional reactions are just echoes of whatever the world fed you that morning? This is why silence isn't optional. It's essential. You don't need a cabin in the woods to be still. You need 3 minutes of real presence. You need 10 seconds of non-reactivity before you open your phone. You need space, internal, deliberate space, between stimulus and response. That's where your real life lives. That's where your real self lives. And if you can access that space daily, even for a few moments, you begin to train your nervous system to stop looking for permission to rest, to pause, to reflect. You begin to build a life that's rooted in what you actually value, not what you're being sold. Because make no mistake, every moment you're online, someone is selling you something. Not always a product. Sometimes it's an identity, a standard, a timeline, a definition of success that doesn't match your soul. And if you don't get still enough to recognize it, you'll buy it. You'll live by it. You'll shape your entire life around it, and then wonder why you feel numb inside. But numbness is not failure. It's feedback. It's your system saying, this isn't it. This isn't real. And real doesn't shout. Real doesn't beg for likes. Real doesn't perform. Real waits for you to get quiet enough to hear it. So the next time you feel unmotivated, pause. Don't reach for inspiration. Reach for silence. Breathe into the discomfort. Let the noise rise and watch it without feeding it. Don't rush to fix your mood. Don't race to push through. Ask instead, what is this moment trying to teach me? Maybe it's not laziness. Maybe it's misalignment. Maybe the goal you're chasing doesn't belong to you anymore. Maybe the habits that once served you have now become cages. Maybe your body is wiser than your schedule, and the ache you feel isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The kind of wisdom that only surfaces when the noise dies down. That wisdom isn't loud, it's not flashy, but it's sacred. And if you follow it, not just once, but every day, you begin to build a life that doesn't need to be motivated constantly, because it's built on truth, on purpose, on deep, centered clarity. That's what Stoicism was always about. Not eliminating emotion, but guiding it. Not ignoring struggle, but embracing it as a forge for the soul. And this right here, this moment of presence, that's the forge. So let's stay here. Let's not run. Let's not chase the next thing. Let's sit in this fire, not as victims, but as artisans, sculpting lives that are not driven by hype, but by harmony. You don't need to be hyped. You need to be home. And that home, the one you're seeking through every achievement, every scroll, every push, it's not somewhere out there. It's in the breath you haven't taken yet, the pause you keep postponing, the silence you've been taught to fear. Let it speak. That's your next step. And we're just getting started. And now we're reaching the part that most people never arrive at. Not because they can't, but because they never slow down long enough to notice the truth. They think they need more fuel, more push, more external fire to get moving again. But what they don't realize is that the fire is already there. It's just been buried under too much noise. Too many voices. Too many false signals telling them who to be, how to feel, and when to act. So let's say it clearly. You don't need more motivation. You need space. You need clarity. You need to subtract, not add. Because your potential isn't asleep. It's just suffocating. The Stoics knew this long before we had neuroscience to back it up. Epictetus didn't say, go out and get more pumped up. He said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. No fluff, no hype, just presence, intention, execution. But that kind of clarity only comes when the noise is turned down, when you stop listening to every passing emotion like it's a divine signal. Your emotions are not always the truth. They are often echoes, responses from an overwhelmed nervous system screaming for peace, not permission. And that's the real killer. The nervous system never lies. It records every wound, every expectation, every demand you've placed on yourself. And when it's overloaded, it doesn't scream, I'm at capacity. It screams, I'm unmotivated, I'm stuck, I'm broken. But those are not the real messages. Those are symptoms. Signals that you've gone too far without resting, too long without reflection, too deep into performance mode without checking if the role even fits anymore. Psychology calls it emotional flooding, a state where your brain is so overstimulated that even the simplest tasks feel like mountains. You're not lazy, you're flooded. You're not unmotivated. You're exhausted from chasing clarity in a storm of contradictions. One voice tells you to hustle harder. Another tells you to rest. One post tells you to be ambitious, another tells you to surrender, and you're caught in the middle, frozen by mixed signals and mental fatigue. So you scroll, you numb, you consume more noise hoping to stumble upon the perfect solution. But the answer isn't louder, it's quieter. It's not more content, it's contact. Contact with yourself. This is where philosophy becomes rebellion. In a world obsessed with consumption, choosing presence is an act of courage. Choosing to sit with your discomfort instead of covering it with motivational sound bites, that's psychological strength. Choosing to turn off the noise and listen to the soft, honest voice within you, that's ancient wisdom reborn in modern chaos. But don't expect applause for it. Don't expect the world to cheer you on for being still. They don't understand that stillness is not stagnation. It's recalibration. And the ones who live from that place, they move with power, not noise. Now let's talk about clarity. Clarity isn't something you wait for. It's something you create, slowly, patiently, quietly, one decision at a time. And most of the time, it doesn't arrive like lightning. It shows up like a whisper after the noise has died down. The Stoics didn't meditate on mountaintops because it looked cool. They did it to clear the fog. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire, but he wrote to himself every night, not because he needed motivation, but because he needed remembrance. He needed to strip away the weight of politics, ego, ambition, and return to something simple, something essential. That's what journaling really is, not a self-help tactic, a ritual of remembrance. So what are you doing every day to remember who you are? If your answer is nothing, don't panic. Don't shame yourself. You're not failing. You're just overdue for return. And returning isn't dramatic. It's not Instagrammable. It's not a highlight reel. It's a quiet choice in a quiet room to stop betraying yourself in the name of performance. It's a breath, a pause, a decision to value peace over pressure, to choose clarity over chaos. Not just once, but again and again, until that choice becomes your rhythm. But make no mistake, returning to yourself will cost you. It will cost you the illusion of control. It will cost you some relationships that only existed because you were pretending. It will cost you the identity you built to survive in environments that no longer serve you. But what you gain, that's beyond words. You gain your presence. You gain your depth. You gain the ability to move through life without begging the world to validate your steps. That's real power. And it's silent. Let me tell you something you already know deep down. The world doesn't want you to wake up. Not because it's evil, but because distracted people are profitable. Numb people are easier to control. Overstimulated people are easier to sell to. And so the noise isn't accidental. It's engineered. Your apps are not neutral. They're attention traps disguised as connection. Your comparison isn't natural. It's curated, designed to keep you doubting yourself just enough to keep clicking, but not enough to stop and heal. So here's the invitation. Unsubscribe from the noise. Not all at once. That's not realistic. But one step at a time. Mute the voices that sell you the idea that motivation is the cure for everything. It's not. Sometimes what you need isn't motivation, it's margin. It's room to breathe, to reflect, to integrate. Because motivation without direction is chaos. And you've been running in circles for too long. Remember this. You don't rise because you're hyped up. You rise because you're clear. You rise because you know what matters and you protect it. You rise because you've stopped outsourcing your compass to people who don't even know where they're going. And that's what this video, this message, is about. Not giving you a high, but helping you remember your height. Not pushing you to do more, but guiding you to feel more, to think more deeply, to choose more consciously. You've got this far because something in you knows the truth, that your greatest strength is not in your hustle, it's in your presence. Not in your performance, but in your peace. And you don't need more noise to find that. You need less. We'll go even deeper in the next part, but for now, just breathe. You're not late. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're just one breath away from clarity. And clarity changes everything. This is Pure Stoic Life, and we're just getting started. So here we are. You've come this far, not because you found motivation, but because you found space. And in that space, something ancient began to stir. Not a new version of yourself, but a return to the one you've always been underneath the noise. And now, in this final stretch, we face the truth most people spend their whole lives running from. Your breakthrough isn't waiting at the top of a mountain. It's buried beneath the distractions you've mistaken for purpose. Let's stop pretending that this is about working harder. You already know how to push yourself. You already know how to grind, how to chase, how to perform. The question now is, what are you grinding for? What are you chasing? And more importantly, what are you avoiding? Because here's the paradox no one wants to say out loud. Some people stay busy because they're afraid of meaning. Some people keep moving not because they have direction, but because they're terrified of what stillness might show them. And that's not a judgment. That's compassion. It's a deep, clear look at how we've been conditioned to equate rest with weakness, introspection with laziness, and silence with failure. But what if silence isn't a void? What if it's a doorway? What if the very thing you've been running from, the quiet, is the only place your clarity has been waiting? The Stoics knew this better than anyone. They didn't chase emotion. They didn't suppress it either. They examined it. They watched it rise, then chose how to respond. They knew that clarity only comes when you create distance between stimulus and response. And what is noise, really, if not a constant barrage of stimulus you've never had time to separate from? Noise says react. Stillness says observe. Noise says keep up. Stillness says wake up. And when you wake up, something shifts forever. You stop reacting to life like a puppet, tugged by invisible strings of expectation, fear, and shame. And you start responding like a conscious being. Not because everything is under your control, but because your perception is. That's the deepest truth Stoicism offers. Not that life is easy, but that life becomes bearable when you stop letting external chaos govern your internal state. Epictetus didn't promise peace through avoidance. He promised peace through ownership. It's not things that disturb us, he said, but our interpretation of them. And what is interpretation but the stories you choose to believe, the meanings you assign, the weight you give to things that were never supposed to define you? And that's the ultimate cost of noise. It convinces you that your life is happening outside of you, that you need more inspiration, more validation, more input to find the clarity you crave. But what if the opposite is true? What if the clarity you need has been whispering all along, but you couldn't hear it over the scroll, the hustle, the self-doubt disguised as productivity? Because here's the most dangerous thing about noise. It looks like movement. It feels like action. But it keeps you stuck. And it's subtle. That's what makes it powerful. It doesn't scream. It whispers. You need to do more. You're falling behind. Everyone else is ahead. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your entire life reacting to echoes instead of responding to truth. That's why this isn't a motivational video. Motivation is temporary. Noise is constant. But presence? Presence is a weapon. When you master presence, you stop being manipulated. You stop performing. You stop apologizing for your pace. Because your life doesn't need to look fast to be meaningful. It needs to be real. And real doesn't require permission. So here's where we ground it. In practicality. In practice. Not another philosophy to admire, but something to embody. First, create a ritual of removal. A daily practice of subtraction. Not what do I need to add to my life, but what do I need to let go of? What thoughts? What tabs? What voices? What identities no longer reflect who I am now? The Stoics didn't build resilience by addition. They built it through subtraction. removing the noise until only the essential remained. Second, choose stillness as a habit, not a luxury. Don't wait for the weekend. Don't wait for burnout. Integrate silence into your daily rhythm, not as a break, but as a bridge. A bridge back to the voice within, the one that isn't rushed, the one that isn't reactive, the one that remembers. And third, redefine progress. You are not growing when you're moving fast. You're growing when you're moving honestly, when your actions reflect your values, when your choices are rooted in clarity, when your life feels like a reflection, not of who you think you're supposed to be, but of who you actually are. That's the shift. That's the moment when everything starts to make sense, not because the world calmed down, but because you did. Not because you found motivation, but because you remembered your rhythm, the rhythm beneath the noise, the you that doesn't need to be pushed, doesn't need to be pumped up, doesn't need to chase anything, because that version of you is whole. And when you live from that place, something strange happens. People sense it. They can't always name it, but they feel it. You become magnetic, not because you're trying, but because you're real. And real is rare. Real is silent. Real doesn't need to convince. So maybe that's the only motivation you ever needed, to stop being anyone else and start being fully yourself. Let go of the noise. Come home to your breath. Come home to your body. Come home to your presence. And watch what happens when clarity replaces chaos. You don't need more motivation. You need less noise. And now you're ready. This is pure Stoic life. And this is your moment. Now live it.